When I speak of focusing on yourself, I am not speaking of the little self, the outer garment that you wear in this world of shadows. I am speaking of your true self, your wonderful human imagination, which is God in action within you. The eternal body of man is the imagination that is God himself, as Blake so beautifully stated. And it is this self upon which all of your attention must be placed if you wish to transform your world. Let me share with you a story from my own experience. Many years ago, a dear friend of mine desired a particular position in his company. There were many others competing for this same position, all of them with seemingly better qualifications. The world would have told him to focus on improving his resume, on working longer hours, on impressing his superiors. But I instructed him differently. I told him, focus not on the competition, or even on the outer actions you might take. Instead, focus on yourself, on your consciousness, on the feeling of already being in that position. I instructed him to create a scene in his imagination that would imply the fulfillment of his desire. Each night before sleep, he would imagine his superior congratulating him on his new position. He would feel the handshake, hear the words of congratulation, experience the joy and satisfaction of achievement. He persisted in this assumption until it felt natural to him. Within a month, against all outward odds, he was called into his superior's office and offered precisely the position he had imagined. Those who knew of the competition were shocked. They could not understand how he had been selected when others appeared more qualified on paper. But you who are here tonight know the secret. He had focused on himself, on changing his consciousness, and the outer world reshaped itself accordingly. You see, the great secret is this. Consciousness is the only reality. All that you perceive outside yourself is nothing more than the outpicturing of your states of consciousness. Change your consciousness and you change your world. This is the law from which there is no deviation. As within, so without. As above, so below. These are not mere poetic phrases, but exact descriptions of how this universe operates. Now, let me make this very clear. When I say focus on yourself, I am not advocating selfishness or narcissism as the world understands these terms. I am advocating the recognition of a principle that lies at the very foundation of life. The entire vast world that you see is an extension of yourself. There is nothing but yourself. Therefore, to change anything in your world, you must first change yourself, not through outer effort and struggle, but through a change in consciousness. This principle is taught throughout Scripture, though it is veiled in symbolism and metaphor. When the Bible says, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be added unto you, it is telling you to focus on yourself, on the divine within you. The kingdom is not some distant realm, but your own wonderful human imagination. And when you focus there first, all things, all the outer circumstances and conditions of your life will be added unto you. Consider the lilies of the field. They do not toil or spin, yet Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed as beautifully as they are. What is the secret of the lily? It does not focus on becoming, it simply is. It fulfills its own nature perfectly without effort, without strain, without comparing itself to other lilies or to the roses nearby. It focuses on being itself, and in that perfect self-expression, it creates beauty that shocks all who behold it. You too must learn to focus on being rather than becoming. The world will tell you constantly about what you should become, about the gap between where you are and where you ought to be. But I tell you, there is no gap except in your consciousness. When you focus on yourself, on your imagination, the God within you, and assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled, you close that imaginary gap instantly. Let me share with you a principle that many find difficult to accept, but which is nevertheless true. You already are everything that you want to be. You already have everything that you want to have. You already are where you want to be. The entire vast universe exists within you now, complete and perfect. Your work is not to create your good. Your work is to become aware of what already is. This awareness, this change in consciousness, is achieved through the controlled use of your imagination. You must learn to focus your imagination on the feeling of your wish fulfilled. Feel the joy, the satisfaction, the fulfillment now, as if your desire were already an accomplished fact. For in the realm of consciousness, in the dimension of imagination, it is already done. And since consciousness is the only reality, if it is done there, it must in time be made manifest in what you call the outer world. Now, I know what many of you are thinking. You are thinking, but Neville, I have tried to imagine and nothing has happened. To this I say you have not really imagined. To imagine, in the sense that I use the term, means to enter into the feeling of your wish fulfilled and to persist in that feeling until it becomes your dominant state. Most people merely visualize their desires, seeing them as images outside themselves, but never enter into the feeling of already having what they desire. Remember, sensation precedes manifestation. If you would experience the fulfillment of your desires in the outer world, you must first experience the feeling of fulfillment in consciousness. The feeling is the secret. The feeling is the soul of the wish. The feeling is God in action. Now, why do I say that focusing on yourself in this manner will shock everyone? Because when you truly practice this principle, results will come into your life that the world cannot explain by its laws of cause and effect. Things will happen that appear to be coincidences, that seem miraculous to those who do not understand the law. Opportunities will appear as if from nowhere. People will be drawn to you without your seeking them out. Circumstances will arrange themselves to aid you without your planning. I recall a lady who came to me in despair. Her marriage was failing, her finances were in ruins, and her health was deteriorating. The world would have advised her to focus on fixing each of these problems through outer action, marriage counseling, financial planning, medical treatment. But I advised her to focus on herself, on her consciousness. I told her to assume the feeling that her life was perfect in every way. Each night before sleep, she would imagine herself lying beside her husband in perfect harmony. She would feel the peace, the security, the love between them. She would feel the relief of financial abundance, the sensation of perfect health. She focused entirely on these feelings, persisting until they became more real to her than the outer conditions of her life. Within 6 weeks, her husband, who had been cold and distant, began to change. Without any discussion between them, he became attentive and loving. A relative who had not contacted her in years suddenly called with news of an inheritance that solved her financial problems. And her health, which had been declining for months, began to improve without any change in her medical treatment. Everyone around her was shocked by these transformations. They could not understand how her circumstances had changed so dramatically without any visible action on her part. But she understood. She had focused on herself, on changing her consciousness, and her outer world had reshaped itself to match her new inner state. This is the law, and it never fails. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. This is not merely a poetic statement, but a precise description of how reality operates. Now, let me be crystal clear about something that many students of this law fail to grasp. The change in consciousness must precede the change in circumstances. You cannot wait to feel the joy of fulfillment until after your desire has manifested. You must feel that joy now, in spite of all evidence to the contrary. This is what the Bible means when it says to call those things which be not as though they were. This takes courage. It takes faith. It takes a willingness to be thought foolish by those who judge by appearances. But those who persist in this practice eventually shock everyone around them with the seemingly miraculous transformations that occur in their lives. I had a student once, a man who desired to be a successful author. He had written several books, but none had been published. The world would have told him to focus on improving his writing, on studying the market, on networking with publishers. But I told him to focus on himself, on his consciousness. I instructed him to sleep each night in the assumption that he was already a successful author. He created a scene in which he was autographing his books for eager readers. He felt the pen in his hand, heard the words of appreciation from his readers, experienced the satisfaction of achievement. He did this night after night, persisting until the feeling of being a successful author was more real to him than the feeling of being rejected. Within 2 months, he received a call from a publisher who who had rejected one of his manuscripts the year before. The publisher explained that he had been cleaning out his files and had come across the manuscript again. Something prompted him to read it a second time. And on this reading, he found it compelling. He offered my student a contract on the spot. Within a year, the book was not only published, but became a bestseller. The publisher was shocked. The critics were shocked. Even the author was shocked by the speed of his success. But he had applied the law, focusing on himself, on his consciousness, and the outer world had rearranged itself accordingly. You see, when you focus on yourself in this manner, you are not being selfish in the worldly sense. You are simply recognizing and applying the fundamental law of creation. All things are created first in consciousness. Therefore, by focusing on changing your consciousness, you are working at the causal level rather than the level of effects. This is true efficiency, true power. The Bible tells us in the beginning was the Word. What is this Word? It is not merely spoken language. The Word is the inner conversation, the feeling, the consciousness from which all things proceed. When you focus on changing this inner word, this inner conversation, you are working at the very beginning of creation. You are working with God, for God and your own wonderful human imagination are one. Now, many of you may be thinking, this sounds too easy. Surely I must do something in the outer world to achieve my desires. And I say to you, yes, you will do things in the outer world, but these actions will flow naturally from your changed consciousness. They will not be actions taken to achieve your desire. They will be actions taken from the consciousness of already having fulfilled your desire. This is the subtle but crucial difference that most people miss. When your consciousness changed, you will take different actions not because you are forcing yourself to do so, but because it is natural to your new state of consciousness. The actions themselves do not create the fulfillment of your desire. They express the fulfillment that has already taken place in consciousness. Consider this principle. Everything in your world is yourself pushed out. Every person, every circumstance, every condition is an aspect of your own consciousness made visible. Therefore, when you meet with obstacles or difficulties, do not fight against them, for that is fighting against yourself. Instead, change yourself, your consciousness, and the obstacle either transform or disappear entirely. I recall a gentleman who came to me complaining of a difficult supervisor at work. This supervisor seemed determined to make his life miserable, criticizing everything he did, blocking his advancement, turning others against him. The world would have advised him to confront the supervisor, to complain to higher management, to look for another job. But I advised him to focus on himself, on his consciousness. I said to him, the supervisor you experience is yourself pushed out. Change your concept of him in your consciousness, and he must change in your experience. The man was skeptical but willing to try. Each night before sleep, he would imagine his supervisor congratulating him on his work, treating him with respect and appreciation. He persisted in this assumption, refusing to be swayed by his daytime experiences, which initially continued to be negative. Within 3 weeks, the supervisor's attitude began to change. Without any confrontation or discussion, he became more supportive. He began to praise the very work he had previously criticized. Eventually, he became this man's strongest advocate in the company. The man's colleagues were shocked by the transformation. They could not understand how such a dramatic change had occurred without any outer action. But this man understood. He had focused on himself, on changing his consciousness, and his outer world had reshaped itself accordingly. This is the law, and it never fails. Change yourself and you change your world. Now, let me address a question that often arises. How long must one persist in a new assumption before it manifests in the outer world? The answer is, it varies according to the nature of the desire and the intensity and consistency of your assumption. Some desires manifest almost instantly, others take weeks or months. But this is certain, when the feeling of your wish fulfilled becomes your dominant state, your desire must objectify itself in your world. The Bible says, in patience, possess ye your souls. True patience is not waiting passively for something to happen. True patience is knowing that what you have claimed in consciousness is already yours, and therefore living in the calm assurance that it will appear at the perfect time. This patience, this assurance, this faith is itself a form of focusing on yourself, on your consciousness, rather than on the outer world of shadows. I want to emphasize something that many students miss. This principle works whether you believe in it or not. It is not a matter of faith in the religious sense, but a law as exact as mathematics. Your consciousness is always creating your reality, whether you are conscious of the process or not. Most people create by default, allowing their consciousness to be shaped by outside influences. But you, by understanding this principle, can create deliberately by focusing on yourself, on your consciousness. Consider how most people live. They wake in the morning and immediately focus on the outer world. They read or watch the news, absorbing images of conflict, lack, and limitation. They review their problems, their tasks, their responsibilities. In other words, they focus entirely outside themselves and then wonder why their lives never change. But those who understand the law live differently. They wake in the morning and immediately focus on themselves, on their consciousness. They enter into the feeling of already being who they want to be, already having what they want to have. They feed their minds not on the appearances of the outer world, but on the truth of their inner being. And by so doing, they reshape their experiences in ways that shock everyone around them. I had a student who was deeply in debt. The world would have told her to focus on budgeting, on working extra hours, on negotiating with creditors. But I told her to focus on herself, on her consciousness. I instructed her to fall asleep each night feeling the relief and security of financial abundance. I told her to feel the joy of paying her bills easily, the satisfaction of having more than enough. She created a simple scene in which she was looking at her bank statement showing a substantial balance. She felt the relief, the security, the freedom that such a balance would bring. She persisted in this assumption night after night, refusing to be discouraged by her current financial statements which continued to show lack. Within 2 months, a series of unexpected events occurred. A project she had worked on years before suddenly began generating substantial royalties. A relative she rarely spoke with called to repay a loan she had nearly forgotten. A property she owned that had been considered almost worthless was suddenly desired by a developer who offered her 10 times its assessed value. Within a short time, all her debts were paid, and she had a significant surplus in her bank account. Her friends were shocked. Her financial advisor was shocked. But she understood what had happened. She had focused on herself, on changing her consciousness from one of lack to one of abundance, and her outer world had reshaped itself accordingly. You see, the outer world has no choice but to rearrange itself to match your inner assumptions. This is not magic, it is law. As within, so without is not merely a beautiful saying, but an exact description of how reality operates. Change the within, and the without must change. Now, let me speak to those of you who have tried to apply this law without success. The most common reason for failure is divided attention. You affirm your desire in consciousness, perhaps even feel it briefly, but then return your attention to the facts of your current experience. Remember, attention is the key. Whatever you place your attention on, you claim as your own. If you divide your attention between your desire and your current limitations, you remain suspended between the two. The secret is to give your desire your undivided attention, to focus so completely on the feeling of your wish fulfilled that your current limitations fade from consciousness. This does not mean denying the facts of your present experience when you must deal with them practically. It means not giving those facts any power to shape your consciousness. You recognize them as the shadows of past assumptions, not the substance of your future experience. Another reason for apparent failure is attempting to dictate the how of your desire's fulfillment. Your work is to focus on the what, on the end result, on the feeling of fulfillment. The how, the means by which your desire will be realized, is not your concern. The infinite intelligence that sustains the universe paths that your limited consciousness cannot conceive. When you try to dictate the means, you limit the fulfillment to your own restricted understanding. I recall a woman who desired to visit Paris but had no financial means to do so. The world would have told her to save her money, to plan for years in the future, to compromise on accommodation and experiences. But I told her to focus on herself, on her consciousness. I instructed her to fall asleep each night in the assumption that she was already in Paris. She would imagine looking up at the Eiffel Tower, feeling the cobblestones under her feet, hearing French spoken around her, tasting French cuisine. She persisted in this assumption night after night, feeling the joy and satisfaction of already being in Paris. She made no outward plans, took no physical steps toward her desire. Yet within 3 months, she received a call from a friend who worked for an airline. The friend explained that she had 2 tickets to Paris, all expenses paid, as a bonus from her company. She could take anyone she chose. And she had thought of this woman. Within a month, they were in Paris together and staying at a beautiful hotel, experiencing everything she had imagined. Her family and friends were shocked. They knew her financial situation and could not understand how such an opportunity had come to her. But she understood. She had focused on herself, on changing her consciousness, and her outer world had reshaped itself accordingly. You see, when you focus on yourself in this manner, you align yourself with the creative power of the universe. You move from the position of a beggar, asking for crumbs, to the position of a creator, claiming your divine inheritance. This is what distinguishes those who transform their lives from those who merely wish for transformation. The Bible states, "If ye have faith as a grain of mustard seed, ye shall say unto this mountain, remove hence to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible unto you." This is not hyperbole, but a precise statement of law. The faith referred to is not faith in some external power, but faith in yourself, in your consciousness, as the creative power in your world. When you truly understand that your consciousness is God in action, that your human imagination is the divine body, you will no longer beg for your good or struggle to attain it. You will simply focus on yourself, on your consciousness, assuming the feeling of your wish fulfilled, knowing that by this assumption you have set in motion the laws of creation that must bring your desire to pass. Now I want to address another question that often arises. What about the desires of others that may conflict with your own? If consciousness is the only reality, and if we are all shaping our experiences through our assumptions, how do we account for the conflicts that arise in our interactions with others? The answer is simple yet profound. In reality, there is no other. What you experience as other people are aspects of yourself pushed out. Therefore, no one can be in your world as anything other than what you are conscious of them being. This does not mean that other individuals do not have their own consciousness and free will. It means that your experience of them is determined by your consciousness of them. Consider this principle. Everyone in your world is yourself pushed out. Therefore, when you change your consciousness of another, they must change in your experience. They may resist this change temporarily, drawn by the momentum of your past assumptions about them. But if you persist in your new consciousness, they must conform to it or disappear from your world. I recall a man who was in conflict with his business partner. The world would have advised him to confront his partner, to negotiate, perhaps to dissolve the partnership. But I advised him to focus on himself, on his consciousness. I told him, your partner is yourself pushed out. Change your concept of him in your consciousness, and he must change in your experience. Each night before sleep, this man would imagine a harmonious conversation with his partner. He would feel the mutual respect, the cooperation, the shared vision for their business. He persisted in this assumption, refusing to be swayed by their daytime interactions, which initially continued to be conflictual. Within a month, the partner's attitude began to change. Without any confrontation or discussion about their problems, he became more cooperative, more respectful, more aligned with my student's vision for the business. Eventually, they developed a partnership that was mutually beneficial and harmonious. The man's friends and colleagues were shocked by the transformation. They could not understand how such a dramatic change had occurred without any outer effort to resolve the conflict. But this man understood. He had focused on himself, on changing his consciousness, and his outer world had reshaped itself accordingly. This is the law, and it never fails. Change yourself and you change your world. I want to emphasize again that this principle works not just in isolated instances, but consistently in every area of your life. Your health, your wealth, your relationships, your career, all are outpicturings of your states of consciousness. Therefore, to transform any aspect of your life, focus not on the outer conditions, but on yourself, on your consciousness. Consider your body. The world tells you that your body is subject to genetics, to aging, to disease processes beyond your control. But I tell you, your body is an outpicturing of your consciousness. Change your consciousness, and your body must change. This is not to deny the value of proper nutrition, exercise, and medical care. It is to recognize that these outer actions are most effective when they flow from a consciousness of health rather than a consciousness of disease. I recall a woman who had been diagnosed with a chronic condition for which conventional medicine offered no cure. The world told her she must learn to live with her limitations, but she understood the principle of focusing on herself, on her consciousness. Each night before sleep, she would imagine herself engaging in activities that her condition had made impossible. She would feel the joy of movement, the pleasure of pain-free existence, the satisfaction of boundless energy. She persisted in this assumption, refusing to be discouraged by her daily symptoms, which initially continued. Gradually, her condition began to improve. Tests that had previously confirmed her diagnosis began to show normal results. Eventually, her doctors pronounced her completely healed, though they could not explain the mechanism of her recovery. Her friends and family were shocked by her transformation, but she understood. She had focused on herself, on changing her consciousness, and her body had reshaped itself accordingly. You see, when you focus on yourself in this manner, you align yourself with the creative power that sustains the universe. You move from being a victim of circumstances to being a conscious creator of your experience. This shift in consciousness is what truly shocks everyone, for it defies all conventional understanding of cause and effect. The world believes in struggle, in effort, in the slow, incremental improvement of conditions. But those who understand the law know that transformation can be instantaneous in consciousness and rapid in manifestation. When you truly change your consciousness, you collapse time. What might have taken years through conventional means can manifest in days or weeks when you focus on yourself, on your consciousness. I want to share with you a principle that underlies all successful application of this law. The feeling of fulfillment must precede the outer manifestation. You cannot wait to feel successful until after you have achieved success. You must feel successful now in consciousness, and from that state of consciousness will flow the actions and circumstances that result in outer success. This is what the Bible means when it says, before they call, I will answer. The fulfillment exists in consciousness before the outer call, for it is made. This is the true order of creation, first in consciousness, then in manifestation. Now, as we begin to draw our discussion to a close, I want to address one more vital point. The practice of focusing on yourself, on your consciousness, is not something you do occasionally when you desire something specific. It is a way of life. It is the consistent recognition that what you are conscious of being, you must become. Each day, each hour, each moment, you are selecting the states of consciousness that will shape your future experiences. Most people make these selections unconsciously, reacting to outer stimuli, accepting the suggestions of others, falling back on habitual patterns of thought and feeling. But you, by understanding this principle, can make these selections consciously, deliberately focusing on those states that you desire to express in your outer world. This is the art of revision, of consciously reinterpreting the events of your day in a manner that aligns with your desires rather than your fears. At the end of each day, before you sleep, review the events that were less than perfect. Do not simply recall them as they seem to occur. Revise them in your imagination. See them and feel them as you would have preferred them to be. By this practice, you literally rewrite your past and reshape your future. Remember, the past exists only in memory, the future only in imagination. Both are malleable, subject to your consciousness now. By focusing on yourself, on your consciousness, you free yourself from the limitations of past experiences and open yourself to the boundless possibilities that exist in the imagination. In closing, let me remind you of the central truth of our discussion. You are the operant power in your world. Not some distant God, not circumstance, not other people, not your past, but you, through your consciousness, through your imagination. Therefore, focus on yourself, on controlling your states of consciousness, and you will shock everyone with the transformations that occur in your life. For when you truly understand and apply this principle, nothing is impossible to you. As the Bible proclaims, all things are possible to him that believeth. This belief is not mere intellectual assent to a proposition. It is the full acceptance in consciousness of the reality of your desire. It is the feeling of your wish fulfilled, the assumption of the consciousness of already being the person you want to be, already having what you want to have. Focus on yourself, on your consciousness, and shock everyone by demonstrating in your life the truth that consciousness is the only reality, that imagination creates reality, that assumption, though false to fact, if persisted in, will harden into fact. For this is the law and the prophets, the secret that has been hidden from the ages, but is now revealed to those who have eyes to see and ears to hear. Go now in the knowledge of your own divine nature, of your own creative power. Focus on your consciousness, and watch in wonder as your world reshapes itself to match your assumptions. For this is the promise, this is the law, this is the fulfillment of all that has been written. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he.